Hello everyone, welcome back. I've been playing lately Infinity Strash, Dragon Quest, The Adventure of Dai. Just finished that up this past weekend. And for me, this game exists in a weird space where I will say that I think it is very underrated from what I've seen as far as little reviews or scores or anything that's kind of trickled out that I've seen as this game was released digitally, and then I had to wait about a week or so after that. Finally, my physical copy came, and in that time frame, it looked like the game was going to be pretty bad, but it's really not. But I say it's in a weird space because normally when I talk about a game that I think is underrated, it's normally something that has very mediocre reviews. The general consensus is that it's a mediocre game, but I think it's like a hidden gem or something great about it or something that I feel like is underappreciated. But this is a game where I think it's a very kind of middle of the road game. It's like a 7 out of 10 game, like a 6.5, 7 out of 10 game. It's not a super great game. It's just okay. But the reviews and what I have stumbled upon, what I've come across, made it sound like this was like a 3 out of 10 like disaster. And I think it's ridiculous. And I wonder how much that has to do with expectations. I think maybe expectations were too high. This was pretty much exactly what I thought it was going to be going in. I think that's why I wasn't disappointed. This is an anime tie-in game, and it feels very much like that. It reminds me of so many different anime tie-in games I've played over the decades, especially Dragon Ball Z, Yu Yu Hakusho, Naruto, whatever. Any of those games, it reminds me of that vibe, or like some movie tie-in games as well. There used to be a lot more of those, I feel like. But that's what it reminds me of, and that's kind of what I was expecting going in, where for the large part it's a lot of these simplified run-through of the story of the anime and then playable portions, and it's a fairly simplistic and repetitive gameplay style. That's kind of what I thought I was getting into, and that's what this game is. I had not seen the anime before this, so that was interesting seeing the story, even though it was very generic, very late 80s, early 90s shonen feeling storytelling. That's what I thought it was, and it worked well for that formula, and it was what it was. I thought it got better as it went along. Gameplay style, it's very repetitive. It's reminiscent of a very simplified and lesser version of the Dragon Quest Heroes gameplay, those Dynasty Warriors style games. It's kind of like a very toned down, a watered down version of that, and it does get very repetitive. It is rather simplistic, but there's just enough fun there where for me I found it enjoyable and it didn't overstay its welcome. I went through in I think about 7.5 hours roughly and played through, and I would play through again because that's kind of a perfect thing where I don't want every game to be this 50, 60 plus hour epic masterpiece. I can only play so many of those in a year. Sometimes I want this shorter, action-based, simplified, just kind of a fun fantasy anime game with this Dragon Quest, Akira Toriyama style artwork and feel and those familiar elements, and I thought it worked well for that. But I did want to mention all those elements in case you're still on the fence about whether or not you want to get this game. That's really what it is. The gameplay is very much you watch some story sequences more directly related to the anime or more redone in the 3D models of the gameplay, and then maybe you have a battle, usually a boss fight, or a fight through a very small linear area with a bunch of creatures, and rinse and repeat for 7 chapters. And on the cover here you see the 4 main characters that will be playable throughout the journey, and this is one thing that I felt kept it from feeling a little too repetitive, was the fact that you can switch between the 4 of them, and they also progress as the story moves along, either inheriting different styles of combat. Even though they're all very similar, the control scheme is the same for all of them, it feels very familiar. There's enough variety in what their abilities are to keep it a little more interesting and a little more customization, as you end up having only a certain number of slots for abilities or spells, and you have to decide what to use and kind of tailor it to your taste. There's a little bit of customization there. Not, again, it's very light, but enough to kind of keep things fresh for its very short runtime. And I just found it to be just a fun little excursion. I think the only thing that I disliked was there is this Temple of Memories, which is a roguelike dungeon crawl that I've never find that style of gameplay enjoyable. And again, the repetitiveness of the gameplay, that very nature, is amplified here because it's repetition built upon repetition, and I just found that not be very enjoyable, and I didn't do a whole lot of that. The problem is that it's not entirely optional, it's mostly optional, but there are key elements to the gameplay that require you to visit that area, because for some odd reason they made the choice where to upgrade abilities you have to go here and do that at this temple instead of being able to do it directly from the menu where you adjust your look and your abilities and everything. The actual leveling up process has to be done here, which is just a weird little extra step that felt unnecessary. And this is where you're going to gain a lot of these memories that are tied to slots that you use to increase abilities. As you progress through the game, you unlock bits of memories, and they will create images that you then use with corresponding ability boosts, say plus to magic, or plus to a certain character's abilities, or plus to your HP. And you unlock them as you play the game, but to actually obtain them, you have to do areas in this dungeon, in this temple, which I, again, didn't find very enjoyable. So I felt like it was a little more optional and not quite as integral to some of the elements of the character development as far as their techniques and abilities. It would have been something I could have just ignored, but it was a little frustrating to have to do that. So again, I think this is an underrated game if you can get it cheap, either digitally, or I'm sure the price will decrease if it hasn't already for the physical copy, because the reviews have not been great. Not sure that it's selling very well. I think it's a fun little diversion as long as you know what you are getting into. I think if you keep your expectations in check and you understand what this game is, just this fun little anime recap side adventure, a very simple action game, if that's what you are looking for, I think it's definitely a good buy. Especially, again, if you can get it cheap, it's a fun diversion for under 10 hours, a little bit longer if you want to do everything. And I think it has some replay value in that shorter runtime, and it's just a fun side Dragon Quest adventure.